Hello and welcome to Making the Switch to IDLx. This is a lab developer program session for Launch 2018 by Learn On Demand Systems. I'm James Burnham. I'm the content team manager. Forgot my own role there for a second. And with me is Brian Bork, who's our senior solutions engineer. Brian, can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
That means that I am responsible for making sure that people have the information and the technologies that they need to be able to produce labs and deliver them to their customers.
Awesome, thank you. And I, kind of in a similar vein, but very different at the same time, I am responsible for helping customers to stand up their content after they've become onboarded into our platform via Brian.
I get them there, you take them the rest of the way.
Exactly.
That's how we do it.
So what we're here to talk about today, Brian, is making the switch to IDLx. And IDLx is our new user interface and our new learning experience. The actual terminology, I know Corey and you were arguing about this a little bit earlier.
In the keynote, yes.
What was the final result of that argument or debate?
At this point, we're still calling it integrated digital learning.
Okay.
But he likes I did a lab. So, but it is X or experience or extra special or whatever terminology you want that to mean. But in the IDLx, in my opinion, means the sort of extra. It's the because quite honestly, it is amazing what we can do inside of IDLx.
So anyone who's familiar with our IDL legacy is what we call it, which is integrated digital labs of old that we'll say. It's still relevant. But it's not quite as snazzy or fancy as the new IDLx.
Snazzy, good word.
Snazzy.
Yeah.
It's very structured and very limited,
Yes.
I would like to say, on how you can format your lab instructions.
Right.
Whereas the new IDLx is very free form and you're free to really do whatever you want for the most part.
Right, and I think our customers are fully capable of making the decision as to which one they want, but I think they need to know what both of them are before they make that decision, which is why we've got this one. But it's not just about what's the difference between the two. It's also about how do you get from old to new, or how do you get from nothing to new.
Yes. So those are some of the topics we're going to cover here. We're going to cover how does the old IDL legacy
There you go.
compare to the new IDLx UI? How do you upgrade from IDL legacy to IDLx? And how do you get external manuals into the new IDLx format?
Right, because there is a difference between having an external manual and having IDL.
Yes, absolutely. So the first thing we want to go over is this is our old user interface. This is what we call IDL legacy. That if you're a long-term client of ours, you've probably seen this one time or another. It's, as you can see here, you've got very structured on the right side there is kind of a table of contents, but it's all tasks and it's ordered that way. There was a structured exercise task. It was a 2-level deep system, which was good for some things, bad for others. And then you had the third pane, or rather an extra pane on the bottom, where it actually went into details on those tasks.
And I noticed that when you captured this screenshot, that you did it in a dark background, because you and the other coders, again, Corey and I talked about this during the keynote. For some reason, coders love that dark background, and so the beauty is that you can still have that dark background in IDLx.
And so we're actually going to flip over and we're going to take a look at what IDLx looks like. So this is IDLx. This is actually in a live lab, whereas the other one is just a screenshot. So we see here with the dark UI, you have our new table of contents. This is actually an optional thing. I wouldn't want to say it's a feature, but this was intentionally written into the lab.
That's correct.
So you don't have to have this if you don't want to. This particular lab does have a table of contents where you can click to things and jump to those parts of the lab. And as you see here, there's no tasks. It's all very free form. It's all paragraph structure. We have things like tables. We have inline screenshots, which is something we could not support with IDL legacy. We have the lack of that bottom taskbar or pane, task pane, and it just looks a lot cleaner. You have the entire left side for your VM. the entire right side for your instructions. You can put headers in here of different levels. So we have this small header here, and then at the very top we had a bigger one, so you can structure that and make it visually identify that things are subcategories of other components. We still have a lot of the old features like alerts and knowledge with the little head icon that we all know. So there's a lot of the, well, all of the old features are still there, but we actually extrapolate on them and go further. So you have things like links now. We never really could support links in the old environment.
So that brings me to two questions. First of all, and I'm playing the part a little bit of our customers. Mm-hmm. One is that this interface is nice, but before we could move the instructions in, and the virtual machine would change, and we could move it back, and the virtual machine size would change. Can we still do that?
Yep. So just like in our old environment where we had the machines tab, we now call it a resources tab. We still have the control, delete, and all these login buttons. So I'm just going to log in. Just because in order for the machine to auto resize, you do have to be logged in. And that's partially a Windows thing. Windows, you can now change resolution when you're on a sign-in screen.
That's correct.
So with that, we can still expand or decrease the size of our instruction pane.
And you'll notice that it doesn't change the resolution, but it does change the structure a little bit, the paragraph structure. So it really tries to fill the space with the instructions. Yep. And we moved the zoom from over on the help tab and moved it over into the actual interface itself.
Yes. So your zoom feature is now right here. So if you had a smaller text or the default text and your student says, oh man, I can't really read that well, they can use the scale over here and update that.
Or if they're just old like I am.
Well, you said
it was nice of you not to say it, but that's okay. So that was the first question. The second question is, you mentioned the links inside of the lab or inside of the instructions. Where do those links appear? Do they appear inside of the instructions, or do they appear as a separate window?
So that's a great question. I'm going to answer that for you in just a second.
Okay.
Back onto the just overall user interface,
yes.
I did want to mention one thing, because we brought up the zoom and we brought up the fact that we can change the size. You had brought up earlier the fact that a lot of coders like myself and some of our dev team really like the dark look, whereas you prefer that light look, and a lot of people prefer that light look. Also, for our remote viewers, that light look often comes off better when you're viewing something remotely. So I'm going to actually change this and just show that you can choose multiple different color schemes. I'm going to change this to like a blue, which is the default. Now, everything except for dark is actually the same exact color scheme, except for kind of these top bars. See how that changes to orange, but everything over here is all still a traditional color scheme. So the only thing you're really changing with these is this top bar in IDLx.
Oh, look, the pretty purple.
The pretty purple. We're going to use purple.
Okay, excellent.
I like purple.
Excellent.
But back to your question of the links, that's truly the author's decision, which we'll get into more detail with when we get into the IDL-MD masterclass.
The masterclass.
The next session that I'll be in with Kirk.
Right.
And we're going to go into
Without
some
me.
really cool detail on that. But just for a quick preview, we have like this here. You can see this camera. We can tell that that is a screenshot or an image of some sort because of the camera. So if I click that, it's going to open up into a new window by default. This could have also opened up into what we call a dialogue, though, which if we go back to the beginning of the manual, we have a great example of that. So this right here could just open right up an overlay over your same interface. So you're not having multiple windows. And that's something that you set as the instruction author. You decide how those links are going to open for you.
And back in legacy days, we didn't have that capability.
We did not.
It opened up. Yeah. That was how you did it.
Exactly. So there's a lot more flexibility now in how you can author. And like I said, we're not going to get into detail for all of the features it contains, because that's what we're going to do in our next session, the IDL-MD masterclass. I'm going to go ahead and cancel this guy out. What we want to jump into, though, is how do we get a lab from this old IDL legacy format into this new format? So in order to do that, we need to go into our lab profile, which I have here, making the switch. Again, anyone who's familiar with our current platform is familiar with what a lab profile is, so we're not going to go into detail there. When you're at your lab profile, though, you will see this instructions, and you see I have IDL Legacy, and it gives me the upgrade option. So if I wanted to go into IDLx, I would just click this upgrade. Actually, before we upgrade, I'm just going to, real quick, I'm going to check this out. Then I'm going to edit the instructions just to verify. So we see we have my purple that I selected, and we see the IDL Legacy format. So we're going to close back out of these, and then I'm going to upgrade. Now, when you upgrade, it gives you a preview of what your lab is going to look like in the new format. So I can see here exactly how this is going to look. So on top of that, it gives you options. You have the option of what do you want to migrate the tasks with just the task text or the actual name as well. Some people have built their labs to conform to our IDL Legacy format, so that task name is important. Others, though, that task name isn't very important, and all they need is that text, which is why we give you that option. For our situation, I'm just going to do the name and text, so it shows up identically to how it does in Legacy.
Okay.
Your next option is do you want your screenshots to appear inline like this one? Also, you'll notice that my names, my tasks, actually adjusted when I click the checkbox. So it does live adjust your preview as you're choosing these, so you can compare and contrast. So you can choose an inline image, which is what we really recommend. We think it looks really good, especially when they're geared. The lab is geared towards, use the images to help guide you. But the other option is to use as links, where it just puts this link here. And by default, those are dialog links. So instead of opening in a brand new window, it's going to open up in just that dialog overlay for you. So we're not forcing new windows on your students. So we're going to leave that as inline, though, because I like the inline look personally. We're going to say, okay. Now you see your instructions change to IDLx.
It really was that quick and that fast.
That quick and fast. It took me 10 times longer to explain those different preview options than it took me to upgrade the actual lab.
Now, we do have a question from our faithful followers here. Have you guys solved for protection of intellectual property with IDLx? And that question is an excellent question, Alan, and we appreciate it. Intellectual property is one of those things that people get a little bit concerned about when they're the person who came up with all this lab material and they want to make sure. The nice thing about what we have currently is that, yes, they could potentially do a copy, but if they were to copy, they would have a difficult time reusing that content. But there is nothing that actually prevents them from copying that content to a document on their desktop.
And that's the same thing, though, Brian. If you're using an HTML manual or a Word document or anything, there's not much really preventing them from copying out of that and into something else. Or if it's a Word document, they already have it.
Right. The only one that truly is intellectually protected or intellectual property protected right now is PDF. By putting a password on, you won't have the ability to copy. But that also means that you don't have the ability to do links or anything like that in your document, which quite honestly you don't want anyway, because that format's going to have it open up a window on top of a window, and it gets a little bit confusing. So for the time being right now, I don't have a good answer for you, Alan, but our team is always working on it, and we will make sure that that one gets to our lab developer friend who is here, Robert, who's going to be in a session with you soon, and you can talk to him about that and say, hey, we had a question about that.
And actually, in that same kind of vein, and I don't want to go too far into this because this is going to be a session that Robert and I are going to do, is although we can't really preserve the displayed result of your instructions, we can, or you can, protect the actual raw code that's creating that instruction by hosting that on an external site like GitHub.
Right.
And then locking that down into a private repository. And we're going to get into more detail on that tomorrow in our version control.
Right.
Session.
So lots and lots of good stuff for you. So keep paying attention.
Okay, so we upgraded our manual now. Now, how do we know for sure, other than the fact that this says instructions are IDLx, how else do we know that this is in IDLx now? We're going to just take a look at it real quick. We're going to edit our instructions. And now we see this is our new editor experience. This is all written in Markdown format. but it's our own internal format that we call IDL-MD. So that's similar to the way GitHub has their own Markdown flavor, GitHub flavored Markdown, or GFM. So it's a derivative of common Markdown, which is the very raw base form of Markdown, and then we add our own custom syntax to it, the same way GitHub does with theirs, but different.
And we've got a great editor.
We do have a great editor. It's a real clean interface. You can see here, all we have is the left side, which is considered my raw code, and then the right side, which this is actually what a student would see in the lab. You can move those left and right, so if you want to see more or less of one or the other. You also have, for as far as options go, they're real simple right on the top. There's just a couple of check boxes that activate or deactivate a few things. And again, we're going to go into more detail on this editor in our IDL-MD masterclass. This right now, we're just referring more to what does it look like.
And I think it's important to note here that for those people who are wondering, can I edit with my virtual machine up and running? You can. It's not as required as it was with the old one, because a lot of the sort of inserts and stuff like that, all of the stuff we're going to be talking about in the next session, are actually based on what we call replacement tokens. It's going to replace this placeholder or token with whatever the lab provides it, so you don't actually have to have the lab running in order to be able to do that.
Exactly. It looks like we do have another question. Our question is the content as far as virtual machines and environment exclusive or publicly available?
That's an excellent question, but I'm not quite sure I understand it.
So the way I take that, Brian, is two different ways, and I'd like to touch on both.
Sure.
So as far as the actual virtual machines and environment being created or being able to modify them, that's 100% private. So if you do not, or if it's my lab and I haven't decided I want you to have access to it, or somebody in my organization to have access to it, they don't have access to it.
Right.
Not to edit it.
Right.
If you want to make it publicly available for people to use, to launch and actually use, that comes down to how you want to make it available. And then that just comes down to your contract with us on, is it something that you have available to all of our clients, or do you host it on your own website? So that's a very complex question to answer. So the answer is one that everyone hates. It depends.
It depends.
It's your choice.
And it's also important to note that students or end users never actually end up with the ability to edit their own lab content. That's only yours as a lab developer.
That is correct.
So,
great question, though.
It
Great
is.
question.
It's one of those questions where you hate to say it, but it depends.
Yes. The worst answer ever, but
especially when James is asking me a question and I'm always answering, it depends.
So, Brian, now I just switched this to IDLx. What if I didn't like IDLx? Do we have a way to convert back?
You're asking me.
Yeah,
You're supposed to be the expert. No, the answer to that question, as far as I understand it, is yes. You can go backwards, and you should not be afraid of accidentally clicking on that upgrade button and going, "Oh my God, I just lost everything," because you didn't lose anything, and B, because you did do an upgrade, what do you have?
So the IDL Legacy and the IDLx, they both live in documents on the back end of the lab profile. They live on our servers, but they live in separate documents.
Right.
So they live together side by side. If you upgrade to IDLx, your IDL Legacy file still exists. So think of it as you have, let's just say that's the name of the files. You have IDL Legacy dot whatever the file type is, probably HTML. And then you have IDLx dot, we'll just say HTML, even though it's Markdown, so I know that. So we'll just say you have both those files. They live separately. An important thing to note is while you can go back to IDL Legacy, and you can even go forward again to IDLx, if you ever use the upgrade button, so if I've gone to IDLx, I've upgraded, then I go back to IDL Legacy, then I want to go back to IDLx, there's two different ways. One is to upgrade again, which is going to completely wipe out any previous IDLx. So if I've modified that IDLx and I click upgrade again, it goes back to the original.
Right.
But if I just want to flip back and forth and keep making edits to my IDLx, that's really simple. You go into your edit profile for your lab, and it's as simple as a checkbox. So with this use legacy format unchecked, And this is actually a great point or a great time to point out the has IDL content checkbox has now changed. It's now the instructions checkbox.
Right.
So this box used to be has IDL content, and if you're familiar with our platform, you've used that box a lot, just keep note that it's now called instructions.
That's right. And we will be talking about that tomorrow in our
LOD skills update.
LOD skills update. Yep.
So when that box is checked, it defaults to IDLx. By checking this other box, it goes back to legacy. And you'll see, once I clicked that, these other fields popped up. This objective and scenario. Those are what we consider legacy-specific fields. We don't force those on you in IDLx, because in legacy, those popped up in a dialog box. Right. Now we leave that up to you as an author. How do you want to display that? We showed in my other one, or in the live lab that I showed, that we popped those up in a dialog. You just had to manually designate that as a lab author. So with IDLx, those go away. So we're going to click this back to legacy. We're going to save.
You should always put notes in,
I should. Yes, that is a great best practice to get into. Please always leave notes with your lab profiles. This lab profile is specific for this session, and then it's going to end up getting deleted, which is why I'm not concerned with leaving a note.
Do as we say, not as we do.
For yourself, always leave notes, because you're going to come back to your lab profile a month down the road. Something's going to be different. You're going to be like, what happened here? Who did this? And it's going to end up being you.
Yep. He said, admitting almost always, it's me.
So we're going to check this out one more time, just because we're back in legacy now. And we're going to verify that we are back in legacy.
And there it is.
All of our instructions are still here. Nothing's broken. Now, if I clicked upgrade again, and I had already made changes to that IDLx, they're going to get wiped out. It's going to replace it with whatever I did. For example, we did name and text. Now we're going to do text only, and we're going to do as links instead of inline. We're going to convert. We're going to upgrade that. Then we're going to edit. And we're just going to scroll down real quick until we hit that image, and we see that I have the link. So it replaced my IDLx.
Right.
If I had gone back into edit profile and unchecked that legacy box, it would have left my IDLx the way I had it.
So then that becomes a question that I'm asking on behalf of the customers. If I make the upgrade and I start editing in IDLx, and then I go, you know what? I want to go back to legacy. The stuff I did in IDLx will be there or not be there when I go back to legacy.
It will not be in legacy.
There you go.
But if you switch back to IDLx, it will come back.
Yeah. So they really are two different items. So if you edit in IDLx and you make a bunch of changes, that IDLx is present and stays there. If you go back to legacy and then you do a bunch of changes, that IDL legacy is there, but never the two shall meet.
Correct.
There you go. Perfectly clear.
So the next topic that we need to get into, Brian, is that's all great if I already have content on our platform in IDL Legacy. But what do I do if I currently have, for example, a docx manual that isn't in our platform, or it's attached as a resource somewhere, but I want to put it in our IDLx format? How do I get that into IDLx and into our platform?
You mean our customers actually don't have stuff in IDL Legacy?
There are some, yes.
There are some who, and the reason we're smiling about that is because we have a lot of customers who do that. And this question comes up quite a bit.
Yeah. And the reason that we have a lot of customers like that is because they enjoy that free form that they can do with a Word document, whereas our IDL Legacy was very structured.
That's right.
So moving into IDLx, they can keep that free form material if they'd like.
But I'm guessing it's not just pointing and clicking a button.
It is not as simple as pointing and clicking a button. It is a little more complicated. It does require some manual work, and we're going to get into exactly how that works right now.
Perfect.
So in order to convert documents into different formats, sometimes there's as simple as, for example, getting a Word document into HTML or into a PDF even. You can open Microsoft Word, you can save as, and you can tell you want to save as an HTML or save as a PDF. Markdown is a little bit different in the sense that it's a very unique language, to put it simply. It's not as, and it's still relatively new as well, as far as document languages go. It's become very popular in the tech community, but it's still new. So some of your older editors, such as Word, even though it stays up to date, it's not up to date for converting directly into Markdown yet.
Okay.
There's a tool that we recommend. It's called Pandoc. It's a universal, or they say a universal document converter tool. It supports almost all document formats going into other formats. So it's not 100% back and forth. For example, actually, we'll get into that a little bit later.
The example in a second.
Yeah, we'll get into the example a little later. What I like to use it for, though, I love using Pandoc for my DocX manuals.
Okay.
It works fairly well. There are some caveats that we're going to show that you need to look out for, but we're going to show you exactly how to use it first. So first of all, pandoc.org, it's a completely free open source tool. It's even commercially, they don't charge for licensing or anything. So if no matter how many manuals you have or
how big they are.
Yeah, or how big they are. It will successfully convert a DocX into Markdown.
Good.
And we're going to show you how to do that right now. Once we get out of PowerPoint. So I have a folder here for our session. I have this Word manual that has a more or less traditional format. This is a format that, for example, Microsoft Official Curriculum likes to use, which is the exercise task format. And a lot of training organizations have followed that format for using manuals. So this is just module 1. It has an exercise, it has some tasks, it has some funky looking sections in here and some code blocks. So we need to get this guy into Markdown so we can get it into our IDLx editor. I don't need to copy this anywhere. I don't need to import it anywhere. All I'm going to do is I'm going to use Pandoc, which I already have installed. Pandoc is a command line tool. So you do have to use command prompt, if I could spell it, or PowerShell.
Okay.
I'm actually going to cheat. I have my command already up here. So a basic Pandoc command is this one right here. It's just pandoc-f, which is from, docx, to, which is -t, markdown. Then you put the path to your file. Then you do a -- extract media, which is going to pull all the images out. So that way you have those images as well. And then you do a -o, which is an output into whatever your file format is. That's a very basic one. It's pretty easy to memorize once you've used it a few times. Or you can always just keep it in a file somewhere that all you have to do is replace the file path.
Okay.
What we're going to use, though, is actually a little more complex one. It's still using just raw Pandoc. We're not using any extra tools. But we're using this really long string here, which has a couple extra options, such as preserving word wrap. Otherwise, things like right here where it wraps the word, or wraps the line, it's going to force a line break there instead of correctly wrapping it. So there are some extra options in Pandoc that we highly suggest that you look through and see what options are there. And if you're going to be doing DocX conversions a lot, make sure you do some testing and see what works for you, for the format your documents are in. So I'm going to copy this guy. Actually, this is my wrong user, but that's okay. That'll work. I'm going to copy it. So the only thing I need to replace, I added these wrap, preserve, and ATX headers, which ATX headers they use a hashtag symbol, which is what we recommend for IDL-MD.
Okay.
The other type of header uses dashes underneath where your header would be, like an underline almost.
Okay.
That functions, so you don't need that option, but I really enjoy the ATX headers. So we added that, and on our to Markdown, you'll just see that there's a whole bunch of stuff dashed after it. That means I took some things out that Pandoc does automatically. So those are the only options that we added there. And all I'm doing now, I'm just changing my path so that it matches where my manual is. So I'm just going to copy this. So I have this in C, users presenter. So I just need to change this James to presenter. And everything else. So this extract media, all you need to put in there is a folder that you want the media to go into.
Okay.
So I just made it converted sample. That's the name of my folder. The output, I'm putting it in a folder named converted sample, and then I'm naming it instructions.md.
Okay.
Now you could name that file whatever you wanted. I always recommend to do it instructions.md because if you have images, you need to import them with the Markdown document to get them in LOD.
Okay.
When you import that, the folder or the Markdown file needs to be named instructions.md.
Okay.
I don't think I can.
We had a request to make this bigger, and it was me that wanted it bigger because I've got bad eyes. So
Yeah, I'm just seeing if that's possible.
it would be under your properties there.
Is it?
Yep. And
That's the cursor size. That's not going to do us much.
nope, it's
Here
under
we go.
font. There you go.
Let's see how this guy looks. Oh, that's almost too big, but that's okay.
That's perfectly big. That looks wonderful.
Okay. So that's all we have there. Actually, I need to add a // in the front of this. And all that's saying is that it's going to be in the same folder inside of a folder named converted/sample.
And again, this instruction is perfect for us in this instance, but you will need to discover which of the pandoc settings that you want to use.
Yes, absolutely.
So don't necessarily take this as the exact command that you're going to type.
Correct. That's why I also included, is this hard to read in there too?
Yeah, it's a little small.
Yeah, so I'm going to just put this in command prompt just to show. This is a very basic one. This one will work for everyone's situation. It just may have extra stuff in there that this other one doesn't add.
Exactly.
So
I can talk about a couple of things while James is working on this as far as customer requests that we get all the time when it comes to this. We're talking about converting docx, but it isn't just docx. People want to know about converting HTML and want to know about converting PDF. And that's part of what we're here to discuss. But the tools and the tools and the functionality are also the same in converting these other tools. Pandoc is pretty much what we use day in and day out for doing document conversion. But there are other alternatives, and we're going to show you a couple of ways of importing content that aren't doing what we're doing here with a template, but doing or I shouldn't say a template, with a converter, but actually taking text out of one thing and putting it into another. So customers also ask about the storage location of the files. Are these files being protected? And as a request came in about GitHub, you can use GitHub, and that is definitely protected. And that is something that we can manipulate with you as a lab developer, being able to set up the accounts that you use to access it and so on. But in the case of like legacy, while we did have GitHub integration, we also stored a lot of stuff in our, we call it our blob. And that is something that we don't do as much because it isn't needed as much when we've got this markdown that we can put, well, we still put it in our blob, we just put it in a different location and in a different format. So the answer to your question is, or the customer's question is, we store it securely on our servers, but it's stored in Azure, essentially. So how's it going there, James?
Well, other than the fact that I realized where my problem was.
What was your problem?
So this is actually a great learning lesson.
For you or for them?
For everyone, honestly. So here's the problem. If you want to just go ahead and show my screen again.
I magically controlled it from here.
So the problem is, and this is an important thing with any command line based tool.
Yep.
So if we look at my command here, even if I change this path to
I
file,
know what you're doing.
Do you?
You're in System 32.
I am in System 32 instead of the directory where this lives. And what that means, well, other than the fact that my slash is backwards here, because that's a Linux-based slash, that means that it's dropping this file in Windows System 32 instead of my current directory, well, where I want my current directory to be.
And Windows gets a little bit ornery when you try to put
So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this exact path. I'm going to change my directory to that, which is CD, put the path in there. Now I'm exactly where I want to be. Now, let's get a little smarter.
Do the big
here.
one?
Yeah, we're going to do the nice big one because it comes out a little cleaner. I don't need this full C path. Now all I need is just the file itself.
Because it's located where
because
you are.
It's located where I am. We're still going to put this in a converted _sample file. I'm going to change this to a proper Windows slash, and this should work.
He said, hopefully.
Look at our folder here. And now I have a media folder, which has my image, which is in the document, and I have a markdown folder.
Okay.
It's amazing what happens when you use the command line properly.
For those of you who've never done a demo, let me tell you, this is going about as well as it possibly could.
So I'm going to open this up actually in Notepad. I have Visual Studio Code in here, but not everybody has a code editor. So I'm going to open this with Notepad that every Windows machine has or should have, just to show that this is now in a official Markdown format. Now with our editor, which I'm not in because that's on the other account that I logged out of, which is wonderful. I'm actually going to go into Internet Explorer just because I don't have, that's not my usual browser, so it's not going to come up with my history or anything like that. I'm going to go into our lab on demand, log back in.
Again, you typically would be signed in and doing everything while while you were working, but the what James was talking about is absolutely essential. Remember where you are, especially when you're working in the command prompt, because it's very easy for us, even though we use this tool every day, it's very easy for us to neglect something simple because we don't work in that directory. When we open a command prompt, we open it from our folders and it's right there where it's supposed to be. Yep. So
yes, your working directory or your current directory, vital when using command line tools. If you're using something like Pandoc, make sure you're aware of where that is and where you're trying to put the file in the command.
That'll be
It was a simple mistake, but it took up a bunch of time because I'm foolish. I'll take ownership of that.
Okay.
So with Markdown, the beauty of Markdown is I have an image. So we can't do it quite the way I'm going to do this. That's worded weird.
Yes.
The way I'm about to do this is great if you have no images in your manual. After I do it this way, I'm going to show how to properly import it using a file with images. So if my file had no images at all I had was this instructions.md that came out of my output. All I need to do is open it in Notepad or any other code editor. Control A to select everything. Control C to copy it. I'm going to come over here. We're going to pretend there was nothing in here. We're starting from scratch. I'm just going to Control V it. And now I have all of this in here.
That looks pretty slick. Except for the missing image.
Except for the missing image. Now I have no image in here. So
That's right.
it worked. It got all my text in here, but I have no image. So in order to get an image in here, we need to use the process of importing, which is right here on the lab profile. You import. We're going to import just instructions. And then in order to do that, though, we have to browse to it. I can't pick multiple files in this browser.
So how are you going to do this?
What I'm going to do is I'm going to take these two folders that came out. I'm going to choose them both. A native Windows feature, so you don't need any external programs. Send to compress zip folder.
Okay.
This folder can be named whatever you want, just like your image file can be named whatever you want. The only thing that has a strict naming convention is the instructions.md. And that is so we can differentiate whether you're uploading IDLx or IDL legacy.
Right.
Because IDL legacy needs to be a content.md.
There you
So
go.
that's why it is important that you name this instructions.md. This zip file, though, doesn't matter what I named it. So I'm just going to bring this guy over here. Oh, that's not going to work. We don't do drag and drop here. I'm going to browse. Then copy my path. I can go right to it. And I have my media.zip. I'm going to replace my existing content because if I don't do that, if I uncheck it, what it's going to do is it's going to append it to the bottom of my lab profile.
Right.
So if you had Markdown in your lab already, and you have more from an external document that you want to add, uncheck that and it's going to add it right to the end. Or you could always, like we showed, just copy paste out.
Right. And it's important to note that this import feature is not only available with IDLx, it is also available with IDL Legacy, but it has much stricter formatting requirements.
Yep, just like IDL Legacy itself, you have to have a lot more strict formatting. Now we edit my instructions, and my stuff is there again. But now,
somewhere,
there was an image.
Was there a link? Did you make it a
There was
link?
an image.
Maybe there wasn't an image. Oh, there it
There's
is.
an image. Before exercise 3.
Yep. Huh?
It's trying to show.
Oh, there it is.
It's there, but it's not there.
And what James is showing at this point is part of the process that you're going to want to do, because nothing converts 100%.
Yep.
It's close, 95, 98%, but not 100%. So why didn't
I
this
just
one?
got to where that my image tag is in the Markdown.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I converted with Pandoc, I told it I wanted my images to go in converted sample, the folder.
Right?
Then Pandoc itself created that media folder, and that's because that's where it's stored in a Word document. A Word document is an XML file with a bunch of other files next to it, which is what makes it look so clean.
Right.
So those images are stored in a media file in the Word document. So all it did is it pulled that file out, put it in this folder I told it to go to.
Right.
Then Pandoc, in the Markdown, put that folder right there.
Right.
I didn't zip that folder up, though. I only zipped up the media. So all I
Right.
need to do is take this guy out and probably refresh my browser. Oops, I don't know what I just clicked. It was not refresh. I clicked export to something. Don't allow. Refresh.
You've downloaded the internet.
Yeah. And now my image should be there.
Nope, I think you still need your
Probably
your
cache.
leading slash.
Do it. Oh, because it's in a folder.
Yep.
Yep.
I think that's still. That's just a guess on my part, but that's what I think it
I'm
is.
not sure why it's not showing up.
Okay.
It should be showing up.
And it could also be cached, which is going to take forever to get rid
Yeah,
of.
it's probably more likely a caching issue
Yep.
at this point. But that's just one of those things you need to look for and be careful of.
Mm-hmm.
Is things like that. So what you could do instead, the way I had done this, is I put my instructions MD in that same folder.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I could have just put my instructions MD next to it,
Mm-hmm.
and then just zip that whole thing up, and it would have imported properly.
Okay.
The other things to look out for are some things like these. These are called anchors. This is a height and width tag that Pandoc adds automatically because it's saying, oh, this image is this big, and we're going to put it in here. Our editor automatically scales the images. So it puts the image in there at its maximum size. If you open this preview up as big as it goes, the image will only go to its maximum size. But if you make it smaller, the image gets smaller with it. So we don't need these weird tags that Pandoc puts in here. So you can just delete those. It's good to look for those. It's good to look for things like this. This is a code block. This whole big section here. If we look back in our Word manual, this starts with glossary. This is right here. So these code blocks in Word, this is actually a style that Word has. So it's not a true code block, and it's not going to format like a code block should in Markdown or HTML. And that's just because it's not the way Word sees it is it's just a cool style, not an actual code block. So with those, you just copy them out and you paste them in. We'll just say that my code block stopped here, even though I know it goes longer. You paste it in and it's going to look properly. So when we go down to that section, but we're going to get more into those things in
the
masterclass.
Mhm.
But now it looks like a real code block.
And
So it's good to look for those kind of things. It's good to look for things like this section here. You see all these are spaced out. In my actual Word manual, those are not spaced out. So those are kind of an improperly formatted list, so to speak. It's something that maybe it should have been a bulleted list or something like that, but you didn't do it that way. So Pandoc might not convert that properly.
okay.
Something to look for. Again, these anchors, anywhere in Pandoc where you had or not in Pandoc, in a Word document where you had a header, it may put a TOC anchor in there.
For table of contents.
Yep, table of contents. So there are a whole bunch of strange things that it can put. Tables are a really cool feature in Markdown that we really enjoy to use. And they can come out looking really good. So for example, here's a complex table where I have bulleted items in there, and then I have another more basic table. So tables can convert over, but if they're really complex, like this one with bulleted items, Markdown by default doesn't support a bulleted item list, but it does support HTML, and Pandoc knows that. So when Pandoc converted my docx into into a Markdown document, and it saw this table that it just can't put into Markdown, it automatically we're going to look on the left side here, it automatically put it in HTML. So it knows that, and it can take complex tables and flip them. It's still good, though, to make sure you review any tables, any code blocks, just to make sure they do look the way you want them to look. And you may need to touch them up.
Right.
You can never, with a tool like Pandoc or any conversion really, guarantee 100% that it's going to be properly converted over.
And for new lab developers, it's an important distinction to make that if you have existing documentation, it's easy to, or it's relatively easy to do a conversion and put that in place. But for somebody who is writing new material, it really makes sense to do it inside of our editor.
Yeah, you do it right in Markdown in our editor, and it's going to come out exactly the way you want it.
Exactly.
One other thing I'd like to point out, because I've seen it in several DocX manuals that we've helped people convert over, is you see I have in this table here this word boo.
Yep.
Which doesn't really fit with the rest of the words that I have in there.
Right.
The reason I have that, if we look at that table in our Word document, because this is a feature that Word supports that actually is used quite a bit. Sometimes a student manual will look just like this.
Mm-hmm.
And an instructor manual will be the same manual, but they have a way to hide things. You have this formatting button in Word. If you click this word boo is actually hidden. Okay. So an instructor could see that just by clicking that button, and students wouldn't know to do that. Most students aren't as well versed in Word as instructors are, or just wouldn't expect that there's hidden items. So that's something else to look for, is make sure you know if there's hidden items in your lab manual and whether or not you need to get rid of them before going into DocX.
So we talked about converting DocX.
Mm-hmm.
So what about those other formats that other people love?
So what are some other major formats that we see for manuals?
Well, what makes a good conversion? Is there a format that makes a good conversion?
Personally, I think Word is one of the best conversions. PDF can be a little bit sloppy, but it can work, mm-hmm. and we'll show that in just a second. And HTML is usually one of the cleanest. Mm-hmm. Personally, I've never actually used Pandoc for HTML. Mm-hmm. I usually will open an HTML manual in my browser. Mm-hmm. I'll copy everything out of it, and I'll paste it in a Word document, save that Word document, and convert the Word document. The reason I do that is if you have images in that HTML manual that are maybe linked from somewhere out on the web, mm-hmm. by opening the manual in your browser, copying it, putting it in a Word document, you're pulling all those images and you're saving them locally. So you have them on your own. You're not worried about if somebody else is going to edit them or if they're going to disappear. You have them. You know it's not going to be modified at all.
And that's a great tip. I mean, that can be time saving right then and there.
Yeah, absolutely. Another great thing about HTML manuals, which I want to show because it's a great aspect.
He's getting excited.
I am
getting very excited about this.
I just figured this out the other day, actually. So our editor is HTML compliant, which means a very common thing actually is you'll have your Markdown in there, and you might have a little bit of HTML here or there in order to format things nicely. Because there's some things HTML can do. HTML is very complex. You can do a lot of cool things with it that Markdown maybe doesn't natively have the tools to designate.
Right.
Things like font size. You can't tell Markdown, I want something this font size. You can do that in HTML. But something I just tried out the other day, and it worked, and I am so amazed and in love with it. I have this HTML manual. I'm opening it in Notepad here. All I'm going to do is copy this. Now, if any of our viewers are familiar with HTML at all, looking through this manual, this is a terribly formatted manual. This is some of the worst HTML I've ever seen in my life. And the reason for that is this manual is a Word document that I save as and convert it into HTML. Word to HTML conversions are sloppy. They work. Mm-hmm. It's a valid HTML file. They just look terrible on the code side of things.
Okay.
But I'm taking this terrible code, I'm going to copy it out the same way we did with our Markdown earlier, and I'm going to put this in our Markdown editor. And now looking on the right side, even my code blocks that from my Word conversion are coming in more or less correct. All of this looks almost exactly like it did in my Word manual.
Even though it's horrible HTML.
It's horrible HTML. If somebody ever wrote an HTML manual from scratch and it looked like this, I would be amazed. I would be amazed that they even were able to do it. So it's not something you would usually ever see on something custom from scratch, but it shows how HTML compliant we are on something as badly formatted as that. To come in as clean looking as this is just fantastic.
And I want to reassure our customers that this, just because your lab manuals might look exactly in HTML format might look exactly like that, we're not insulting you. We just know that we get our HTML sources from a lot of places, XML, all sorts of different places. So it doesn't always come in clean, but yet without doing Pandoc,
Without Pandoc,
all we did was just copy and paste right into our editor, and that's a feature that, again, you don't have inside of Legacy.
correct.
So, all right, the last thing we're going to show them. What's the last thing we're going to show
The
them?
last thing we're going to show is a PDF manual.
Okay.
A PDF manual is going to go basically the same as a Word document. So a PDF manual, I don't know if all of our audience is familiar. Well, most of them are probably familiar with a PDF in general.
Yeah.
But what a PDF is actually an image format. And a lot of people don't realize that. They just think it's a document. It's not. It's usually an image of a document. So if you take a docx and you convert it into a PDF, it's technically like kind of a whole bunch of screenshots of that docx for the most part. It's really weird how they're formatted, and they're terrible to convert out of. They're very difficult manuals.
You keep using that word.
Terrible. Because sometimes things are just terrible. You can't help it. For example, if I take a Word document, convert it to PDF, take that same PDF, open it in Word, and save it as a Word document, it's going to be all messed up. That conversion, every conversion you do makes things sloppier.
Right.
And that's just the nature of converting. No matter whether it's a document, a video file, anything, every conversion you do, it's going to get messier and messier. What I am going to show actually is not Teams, because Teams popped up on me. So I have a PDF manual here. This looks pretty much identical to the way our Word manual did.
Yep.
All I'm going to do is I'm going to do a Control A. I'm going to copy everything out. I'm going to open up a brand new Word. And paste it in there.
Okay.
And then I would save it, and I would convert it the same way we converted our other Word document. Easy peasy. It's not going to be as clean of a conversion as a regular Word document, and that's because things like these headings in Word, this would be actually labeled, for example, as a heading 1, and would officially be recognized by Pandoc as a heading. Due to the PDF, it's converting over as plain text, and it's just a sized font. It's not quite as clean, but it still works.
Okay. Excellent. So how many different options have we shown them now?
We showed Pandoc with a Word document,
Mm-hmm.
Pandoc with a PDF, because it's basically the same process. We mentioned Pandoc with an HTML manual.
Mm-hmm.
We showed an HTML manual being pulled directly into the Markdown editor. And we showed IDL Legacy being converted into IDLx. We also mentioned, but did not show, authoring a Markdown manual from scratch, right in the editor. So that is 6 options to get started with IDLx.
That should be more than enough for anybody to get started.
Yes.
Once you get into the masterclass, that's where you're going to be learning all of the tips and tricks of really not just developing a good manual, but really making it a good learning experience.
Yes, absolutely. With the masterclass coming up, we're going to show how to truly make it interactive as well, and make it so students can interact directly with the manual instead of just interacting with the lab.
Exactly.
It's going to be some really good stuff.
So make sure you pay attention. That's coming up in a little while, and we hope to see you at this or the next session.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you.